Okay, I think I'm going to start. So welcome to everyone attending today to this the third event in a series throughout June where we explore what we can do to improve inclusion and diversity in our organizations and the role of training and the role it plays. As employers, we have a responsibility to help create a society where everyone can work, develop, and contribute. We know by now that inviting diverse talent and focusing on inclusivity helps us be more innovative, more creative, and also solve our customers' problems. Neurodiversity is a concept that might be completely new to you today, or maybe you're still finding it hard to navigate. So our speakers today are going to help us understand that. What is neurodiversity and what do neuro-inclusive organizations look like? A warm welcome to Professor Amanda Kirby, who will be our third speaker. Amanda is a qualified GP and has 20 years experience in neurodiversity, and she ran a clinical and research team for many, many years. She is now the CEO of Do It Solutions, a tech for good company that provides screening and assessment tools for neurodiversity for all ages. She is also a trustee of the ADHD Foundation and involving with many other charities. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind of introduction. I'm going to just share my slides, if that's okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to say a few words about Helen, just briefly.
Oh, right. Yes, thank you.
Just introducing all our speakers, sorry.
Sorry, apologies.
So Helen, welcome, Helen. Helen has been diagnosed as autistic in 2017. She works in financial services as a management consultant and heads up there the Neurodiversity Employee Network, as well as the Global Ability Employee Networks. She is the founder of Me.Decoded, a website that helps people share their stories and gives insight into the life of the neurodivergent. Helen is also a trustee of Autism Forward and is a prolific advocate and speaker on neurodiversity, and one of her talks include TEDx Square Mile. Welcome, Helen. It's an honor to have you here today. And yeah, let's start. Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody. I'm just going to share my slides. Inevitably, you're going to have some slides. So I'm going to get them up on the screen. So thanks for the introduction. And I suppose in 20 minutes or so, I'm going to cover what is actually a huge topic area and try and make it digestible in a sense to give you some introduction about the terms, the words we're using, why we use them, and why I think neurodiversity framing is really good for training and for employment. So you introduced me a little bit about my professional background, but personally, I am an oddball. I don't fit into a nice category. I don't fit into a nice diagnosis, but I come from a really neurodivergent family where many of us have got labels, diagnoses of ADHD, autism, developmental language disorder, dyspraxia, and more, and dyscalculia and dyslexia. And I think historically, growing up, probably I had ADHD traits, but a lot of those weren't recognized in females in the way that we were noticed at that time. So I was the dreamy and attentive doodler at the back of the class, talking to somebody next to me, getting really bored with subjects like history because I couldn't remember the dates. It was really boring. But when I was really interested, I focused and attended, and I could remember things when they were of high interest to me. So, yep, this is the stuff that you've heard about really in the introduction, and my family. And I suppose that gives me an understanding of grandchildren and children, of moving through the system of Why is it important that we think about neurodiversity? I take this really personally as well as professionally. And why has it been that I stopped doing one career and moved into this area? Because I needed to find solutions for my son, who is 35 now and married in a job, but I've got grandchildren as well who are neurodivergent, so it doesn't stop. But 25 years ago, what happened 30 years ago, people thought you grew out of this stuff, that you got a card that made you were better, that you were cured on your 16th birthday. There was very little knowledge about what happens in education, further higher education, and employment. People thought you had it or you didn't have it, whatever that it was. So I've written a lot in this field, got a new book coming out shortly. That's my plug over. So what I'm going to do is really talk to you in a short space of time about what is neurodiversity, why is it important, and then hand over to Helen, who's going to talk about her personal experiences, but also professionally, what we can do. So where's it come from? Why are we starting to use this term neurodiversity? Then we weren't using it. I've come from a background where we've talked about learning difficulties, disabilities, specific learning difficulties, neurodevelopmental disorders. I'm a medic, so I did come from quite a medical model. You had it or you didn't, you were diagnosed or not. So Judy Singer, Harvey Bloom in the late 1990s started talking about this. Judy from a sociological perspective, who's a sociologist from Australia, talking about, well, if we have super specializations in animals and birds, why wouldn't we have the same sort of specializations, spiky talents in human beings? Why wouldn't genetically we would have hung on to these, because they would have been important for the world itself. So we started talking about neurodiversity. I've really thought about this. I think about it a lot. I spend my evenings and nights thinking about this stuff. So, but I think what the important thing is that our brains naturally vary from person to person. We are diverse. We have 64 billion neurons wiring. Why would we categorize ourselves in 6 bricks or 8 bricks to say you are or not? There are categorization systems like the American Psychiatric Association, which have 300 categories. But actually, we are all different. We all think, move, act, process information, visually intake information, hear in different ways and communicate differently. And that is what neurodiversity is. It's not a thing. It's not a diagnosis. It's representing the variable nature of how our neurons connect in different ways. So we're talking about 15 to 20% of the population. Because we're talking about, it's not a nice neat bell curve, but I'm going to use a bell curve as an example, but we're talking about people who diverge from the typical. And when I'm talking about the typical, I'm talking about what society deems as typical or average. So society deems as average or typical that you will read, write, and spell. You will speak, you will hear, you will walk, you will move. And our education system is then devised for the average rather than the divergent. And I think that's really important. So if you think of a classroom, 30 children in a classroom, we've all got to sit there and we're going to be doing things in a certain way. So neurotypical is for efficiency, okay, but doesn't represent all of us and the way we do things. So in your workplaces, in training, in your exec teams, in your supply team, in recruiting people, and you may have children like myself, you may be neurodivergent, or you may have children who diverge from that typical norm. And the challenge then is you don't fit into those typical places and the way we carry out, the way we train and the way we employ. Now, classically, people are associating neurodiversity with autism very much and the framing of autism. However, neurodiversity doesn't equal autism, and neurodivergence doesn't either. We're recognizing some people diverge in the way that they do things from the average. I've never met an average person. That's the other thing. Averages are about data and statistics. And if you take somebody and you try and find the average person, please bring them to me because I haven't met them yet, okay? So neurodivergence, we often associate this with specific neurodivergent traits and conditions like DLD, developmental language disorder, DCD, dyscalculia, autism, ADHD. But also our brains don't go, okay, These are developmental, and all the rest of things that go on in your brain are acquired. We don't talk about that. But a neurodivergent brain may be one that isn't processing information the same way because the person has Parkinson's. So you can acquire conditions as we go on, and you can have dyslexia and Parkinson's. In our family, we've got dyspraxia and Parkinson's running in our family, okay? Enough for another day to explain that one. There is a reason for it. So neurotypical, that bell curve, which is not as neat as that, of course, okay? But we diverge, and often divergent seen as sort of a negative association, but actually we can diverge in a way that if we're brilliant at maths, we become an actuary, or we could be acalculic. We could be a premier footballer, motorically really able, but you might have a spiky profile and have difficulties with spelling. You could be dyslexic. So the spiky profile of strengths and challenges means we can diverge with our strengths, which if we utilize them, they can be what the workplace wants. And if we look where we have got challenges, we can then try and minimize those to maximize those skills, okay? But if you fit in the middle, and I, as I said, I'm an oddball. I don't fit in anybody's middle really, ever. If you fit in the middle, then you move through society relatively easily. You can send a CV in, you can go to an interview because your communication skills are okay, even though the job might not require good communication skills, the interview might, which might be problematic. So not everyone will come with a label, some will be missed out. We see females, particularly with ADHD and autism, would have been missed, okay? 20, 30 years ago, we kept looking, even till relatively recently, looked through a male lens. You will get a diagnosis if you've got the right color balls in the bucket. So if you've got blue balls, then you will, and they're dyslexic ones, you're more likely to be picked up in education because we're looking for literacy. We're interested in literacy. So that will be why you will be identified, more training on dyslexia. So if you have the right color cognitive profile, you're more likely to get identified. However, some people don't have the right cognitive profile for society. They might have been looked after children, moving around the system. They might have been excluded from school, or they may have challenges, say, related to ADHD traits or developmental language traits, where teachers, educators, employers know less, then even though they might have significant challenges in some areas, they may get their needs missed altogether because they haven't got the right color balls. Or, like we see in some sectors, like in justice, where we see a mixed colored pattern, you don't quite meet that threshold for a diagnosis, even though cumulatively you've got challenges, maybe in some areas, and strengths, you don't get your needs met. So we have diagnostic biases, okay? Some more easy to get than others. So if I had lots of time, I would go into this in lots of detail, but I don't this afternoon. But really, these are the common neurodivergent traits which are often associated. It's a busy picture because they commonly co-occur or overlap. Because remembering, our brains don't go, let's have a dyslexia part, let's have an ADHD part. There are different parts. But I think what is important about this slide is that till relatively recently, we were talking about dyslexia, dyscalculia, attention deficit disorder. This was a very negative paradigm, which was talking about what people couldn't do and was from a deficit model. I think what we're doing now is starting to flip the narrative and start to say, okay, somebody with ADHD often has energetic, enthusiastic, sees linkages with things, perseveres, works under pressure, is creative, on the go. Not everybody has all of these things, but they may have quite a few of them. Compassionate, interested in novelty, hardworking. Now, I've got some of those traits. I have ADHD traits. You want to employ me? I'll send my CV to you tomorrow. But the point is, when we start saying these are things that are positive framing, it changes the narrative when we're really talking about recruitment and retention. But remember, few people are just one thing. They've got different balls in the bucket. And two people with the same diagnosis are very different people. So somebody else with ADHD and somebody, if I've got that ADHD trait, would be very different because we come from different backgrounds, different experiences. So we've got to move away from dyslexic people get beige paper and colored overlays. That just won't work. We need to be person-centered and in context. So lots of people have got spiky profiles. This is a profiler that I run on my day job. But also most people I've seen clinically over the last 25, 30 years come along often, and there's lots of evidence with having mental health challenges at some times, if I can't do what I need to do in work, I'm going to worry about it. It's going to affect my anxiety. So we can see higher rates of anxiety and higher risk of depression. Our brains don't go anxiety on, neurodiversity off. But sometimes our services are like that. So we sometimes have services in silos, even though people are people. And it's all about people. I can have dyslexia, ADHD, and bunions. I can be sporty, a parent, and have asthma, right? And I think that's really important that we're thinking about moving away from, is it gender, is it neurodiversity, to thinking about people much more, okay? Because it's only one part of who we are to be our, people use the phrase, our authentic self. So last couple of slides, and I'm going to hand over to Helen, we'll take a couple of questions, but I think that what I've been working in this field for a long time, and what I do see now is this positive reframing that we're using terms like neurodiversity offers up a opportunity for dialogue. Tell me about you. Tell me about what you can do, and not about you're dyslexic or you're not, you're dyspraxic or you're not, and being defined somebody in a box. It allows us, if you're a trainer or you're an employer, to have those conversations. And we're seeing people come forward more. Elon Musk the other week was talking about his autism. We wouldn't have seen that a few years ago. And I think that's a very positive framing. But people coming into a workplace, you won't be able to spot them. So people don't come with nice labels with a tattoo on your forehead. But you have a legal duty of care. You have people in your workforce already. You'll help with improved engagement. You'll create and consider novel solutions. I'm doing a piece at the moment around neuro-entrepreneurship and really looking at the evidence, growing evidence of why we'll come up with new and novel solutions if we harness this talent. Better team working to be able to have those conversations. If we recognize we communicate differently, not right or wrong, but we'll have different communication preferences. And I think millennials care. So if you don't think about this stuff, you're not going to attract talent into organizations. They care about this stuff more than perhaps a generation ago. And your customers and clients, if you are outward facing, why would you ignore 20% of your organization? So I'm going to just finish off. What stops dialogue? Well, when we can't share, that we don't feel comfortable. And this is truly the case where we see people didn't feel comfortable or have had bad experiences. This is about equity, not equality. It's about doing what's right for each individual and adjusting this in a person-centered way. I like this quote from Maslow. I suppose it's tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything if it was a nail. I think we have to treat each one of us as individuals rather than doing that. And that requires universal design, inclusive design principles. So in something like even doing this presentation, telling you what's going to happen, giving you choices, representing information in different formats, following up and answering questions afterwards, and doing a Q&A meets different people's needs, and that's important. I believe most of this discuss is about attitude. It's about low cost, no cost strategies quite often. This is guidance that I got from many neurodivergent people who said, what would help them, help me? I thought, yep, I use all of these. I need all of these. So it shows that actually strategies are not difficult to implement. And I think there's a case for really organizations trying to do a maturity gap analysis to see where they are on the journey. And I think probably at that point, thinking about the cycles of inclusive practice, maybe it's useful to take Q&A and then hand over to Helen, and then I can answer any questions after that as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amanda. It's a great presentation. There is like a lot to learn, a lot to digest. And yeah, I want to reassure everyone that we will share the slides so you can come back to them after the event. It's yeah, so interesting. Thank you. We have a few questions in the Q&A. So some of them are more practical, but I'll start with this question. Do anxiety and depression fall under the category of neurodivergent or mental health, or both?
Well, that's an interesting one, because I think it's an interesting discussion why we're going, is it either or, right? So if we say neurodiversity is the way we think, move, act, and behave, communicate, hear, and sense, mental health and neurodiversity are categorizations because of service delivery. They're the way services are organized. So that when people say, is it mental health or not, you would go to see classically an adult psychiatrist if you needed to have help for schizophrenia. But actually what's happening is the same people, if you're talking about service delivery, for instance, the adult psychiatrist might also diagnose autism and might also diagnose ADHD. And what we're also starting to see in children's services, for instance, is there are neurodevelopmental pathways. So the categorization, is it mental health or not, depends who's looking at it and depends who's talking about it. But my anxiety, if I have to stand up and do a presentation, I may become anxious because I'm worried about my spelling, my writing, my understanding, my communication. So we can't say one is one and one is not the other. We love, as human beings, we love categorizations. We like to say you are or you're not, you're in this box or not. And unfortunately, the hormones that drive things like ADHD, one of them is dopamine, also drive things like anxiety, but they also drive motor function, right? So it's about why are you asking, what the reasons for, and is it about navigation for diagnosis, navigation for services, classification systems? So it is hard to answer it in one sentence, I think, probably.
Yes, definitely. And there's also, to jump on this thought, like how can we start the conversation with our colleagues without offending or worrying everyone based on previous bad experiences, or just, I don't know if you two have ideas.
Really, actually, that's the easier answer, okay? So one is don't assume. Don't assume anything, all right? So tell me about yourself. Tell me about what you like doing. Tell me about your strengths. Are there any training or skills gaps? So if you're a line manager, do line manager things. Are there areas that you need some support? Shall we discuss how we communicate effectively together? So it's about the things when you're setting up to have onboarding, the things that you would do to ensure that communication is clear, that it's understood. It's not making assumptions. Oh, you've got ADHD, my sister's got ADHD, I know all about that, right? So making an assumption. So it's about having an open conversation. There was a publication published last year about the right language for autism, if somebody's autistic or there's someone with autism. And different people want different things. It's personal. And I think that's the bit, is don't assume and ask. And be respectful. I think that's the bit, is be respectful, you know, and what that person says, that's theirs. You don't say that's wrong, because it's their right, you know, do you know what I mean? So I think, you know, somebody said to me the other day, he's got, the man said to me, I've got Asperger's syndrome. That's fine, if that's how he is framing and describing himself, and that's how he wants to be described.
We've got another question. If you could tell or teach someone one thing about neurodiversity, what would you say?
Oh gosh. I would say neurodiversity is all be respectful and listen and ask somebody and have a dialogue rather than a monologue. Check your communication preferences and the other person's, and check for understanding. That's crucial. Check for understanding. Don't assume what you've said has been understood. That's your responsibility. So I think that would be the key, is we're all different, and don't assume the way you communicate is the way somebody else wants to.
Thank you very much. I'm just going through the questions as well. And I think then we'll do one more question. And okay. How do we enable teachers to be supportive in schools where children with neurodiversity are just seen as difficult?
So change the framing. My grandchild's 7, right? I want you to see he's a superstar. He's great at maths, right? He's really good at Minecraft. He'll tell you all about it in huge detail. but he is fidgety. He finds it difficult to sit still, and he gets bored easily, right? So you can either see him as superstar, brilliant, amazing, he's going to be your next computer scientist, or you can see him as a nuisance who can't sit still, who annoys the other children. So the first thing is our framing. Second of all is universal design for learning. Let's think about how we deliver education which reaches all the children, not some of them. And by doing universal design principles, thinking about how we deliver education in an inclusive manner, we're not dealing with my grandson or the 2 or 3 children in the corner. We're thinking about actually every child's got talent. Let's find out and work with their talents. And that means, maybe it does mean it's standing up in class at the back of the class is fine, you know, because to stretch and to move around. Maybe we expect children to sit for too long, you know, and adults too. So changing the way, and if we can do that at home working, why can't we do that at school? COVID, how awful it's been, has allowed us also to see how we can deliver education differently. Let's not go back completely to where we were. Let's use this as a way to move forward and take that learning, what we've gained during this time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your questions. We haven't gone through all of them, but there will be a second Q&A at the end. So I try to go through them. And if, yes, let's just get on with Helen. Welcome, Helen. Helen is going to tell us about the journey in her organization of creating a company that is really values neuro-inclusivity and the impact that it's had on its people, its culture, and the impact it can have on the performance as well. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Julia. So I will just make sure that I am sharing those slides, and hopefully that's coming up. So welcome everybody. And during the second part of the presentation, as Julia mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit about my own personal experience. As Julia mentioned, I was diagnosed as autistic just 3 years ago, or 3 or 4, kind of, it changes every year. I need to keep the numbers up. And then to talk to you a bit about how that then led to my discovery of neurodiversity and some of the changes that I've started to bring about in the company that I work for, and also some of the insights that I've gained through having set up Me.Decoded, which is the website that I run, because I believe that to truly understand about neurodiversity, we need to hear from a range of voices. As Amanda said, each and every one of us is different. We each have a story to tell. Though what we do see is there's quite often common themes like increased anxiety, having struggled both in school and through the workplace. And so as I talk about my journey, I will touch on some of the common themes that I've experienced that overlaps with a lot of people, but not everybody will have had the same experience. I have a young son. He was diagnosed at the age of 5 years old. And so his life experience as an autistic individual is very different to mine, though he does have many similar types of struggles and challenges. And so hopefully what you will get from my part of the piece is just a more personal experience, how it feels from the perspective and why this is so important for young people in education and for what we can do in organizations. And so I really want to talk to you and take you on a journey, right? Because, I think for me, the discovery about, who I am and finding myself and understanding the way in which I think and why I react the way I do has been a journey that's been very closely associated with my career. At school, I started off as a librarian assistant. On Saturdays, I'd go into the library and I would stack books in alphabetical order. I was a brilliant worker. I had glorious reviews. At school, things were a little bit different. I was socially awkward. I was branded the nerds, and the large volume of kids on the school fields I found quite overwhelming, and quite often would find myself sitting on the sidelines watching as an observer. I was quite often bullied and I struggled. So for me, the library and alphabetizing the books and finding out the knowledge was fantastic for me. I went on to university a number of years later. I didn't go straight there. I had a number of challenges. But once I got to university, I'd been upgraded from the nerd to the geek, and I still stood out, but I'd bought myself a job. I was self-sufficient as a waitress. Now, most of you kind of think of waitresses, it's quite a people-focused thing. For me, it was about taking orders. I would take an order, collect it, deliver it, and always used to wonder why my tips were never quite as much as some of my other colleagues, but I got the job done and I made enough to support myself as a student. Leaving university, I graduated in the top 2% of my classroom. Not classroom, I wasn't in the classroom, but in the class. But I struggled to secure myself a job. I had a degree in business analysis and information studies. And despite my high grades, I was unable to secure a graduate job. I never got past that first round. And so I went in and became an office admin. I sat there in a tiny little office. I, by this stage, moved from South Africa to the UK. And I can remember I sat there, I was supporting our marketing manager, grew bored, and didn't like filing. And so I automated their invoicing system on my own, again, a sterling job. And that got me into the world of work proper, where I then went on as a graduate trainee to become a software developer. It had its own kind of thoughts, but I could head down, get on with the coding. And I loved it. I was part of teams, but we never really quite fit together. My nickname was Wirewool because I could be a bit abrasive. And, I worked through that, and it took me about 3 years in the organization before I started to make some friends with some colleagues and started to interact more. And it was largely enabled by a very sociable person who introduced me to the wider group of people. Until then, people had just thought I was aloof, distant, abrasive. And so I felt quite outside. I then moved on to become a business analyst. By now, I had developed a taste for understanding how do the different parts of different software, how they talk to each other and how they connect. And so I got into financial services, understanding, and there it's all about analysis, going in, finding documentation, building up a picture of how things work. And I was brilliant. And for that, I got rewarded with a promotion and moved on to become a project manager. Now, the shift from business analyst to project manager, suddenly I was no longer just doing the analysis. I needed to manage a team of people in order for them to do the analysis. And let's just say that it was a bit of a rocky start. So those micromanagers, the people that are really wanted their way or the highway. Well, I was that. I thought I was helping. I wanted them, why should they spend a lot of time learning from their mistakes? I'd already made those mistakes. I knew what they needed to do. So it would be a lot quicker if they just listened to me and got on with the job. They saw me as being difficult. I was confrontational and conflicting. And, there was quite a lot of tension, but we managed to get through. Buoyed by financial services, I decided that I wanted to do more in different projects and work in big banks. And this is when I took the dive into management consulting, because they do exactly that. They go in and help banks solve problems. Now, I have to admit that when I became a management consultant, I hadn't really looked up what they did. I just thought it would be a whole lot of analysis, different projects and everything else. And so it was a bit of a shock when I turned up on the first day in the first week and realized being a management consultant is all about people. I've been in my current company for about 13 years. So in 2 weeks, it'll be 13 years. And for the first couple of years, I got by. There were development feedback points around, look, great at the job, great at delivery. But when it comes to the people, Helen, you need to do better. You need to change. People were calling me difficult. In fact, one colleague commented when we were having a conversation about conflict management, told me that whilst I wasn't that great at resolving conflict, I was brilliant at causing it. Conflict seemed to follow me wherever I went. And so I thought about the people side of things and the development feedback that I got, and realized that if I wanted to be good at my job, a good management consulting, I needed to become good with people. And so I tried. I read books, I went on courses, I went for life coaching, therapy, right? But none of it seemed to stick. None of it seemed to work. People didn't get me and I didn't get them. In fact, even my therapist didn't seem to get me, and I fell out with most of them, felt frustrated. And in the end, I was left feeling overwhelmed. I was struggling and almost crippled with anxiety. And that had a devastating impact on me and my ability to succeed. I thought that I didn't have what it takes to be successful. I wondered what my future held, that who I was not enough. And it was around this time that my son had been diagnosed as autistic, and he was suddenly struggling at school. What I learned as we supported him through not one, but 2 different school exclusions, I realized the importance of the right environment and the right setting. By the age of 6, he was on his 3rd school. We'd been told by many schools who didn't want to make adjustments. We didn't want to give him preferential treatment. It was too timely, it was too complex. And they were just focusing on the behavior, on the things that were going wrong. What I saw as a bright, intelligent boy, they just saw as someone with behavioral issues. They didn't see the potential in him. And as I learned about him, and we finally found the school and saw the fundamental change that happened when he was in a situation with the right support and the right strategies. There wasn't a big change. These were tiny little changes. He transformed. All of the challenges disappeared in a fortnight. In a fortnight. He had gone from being a child that was described as willful, disruptive, difficult, to a child that had a brilliant sense of humor, curiosity, and a desire to learn. He loves maths and science, and one day he is going into, he tells everyone, mergers and acquisitions. He may not use that language, but he has a plan to take over the world and take over businesses one at a time as he makes his way. So, he is not short of ambition or desire. The only thing that currently limits him is, are the educational settings and organizations ready for him? Are they ready to provide him that environment that will help him fulfill that potential and realize that ambition? And in looking at him, as I struggled in my own career and looked at all my peers being promoted past me, knowing that when it comes to delivery, I was as good, if not better than them, but I was being left behind. 7 years, I tried and failed to get the promotion along with my peers. And then I realized perhaps some of my challenges could also be linked to something else. And that's when, after realizing and finding out what are the different traits or challenges faced by autistic people and many of the undiagnosed pool of mothers that were starting to find out later in life, that maybe that was me. And so when I went to get my diagnosis, I approached it with trepidation. What happens if they say no? What happens if they say yes? Do I want to be open about it? Does it really make a difference this late in my career? But what I realized at that point, as I discovered about neurodiversity and the social model of disability, is that we may have impairments, but it is within the context of an environment that we may face a disability. And so I didn't need to change who I was. I needed to change the way in which I worked. I needed to change the environment that I worked in. And what I realized is that I didn't need to become a social butterfly. I needed a social bridge. just like that young woman in my first job as a software developer. She helped me connect to other people socially within the organization. And that opened new doors for me. As a management consultant, I don't need to be a social butterfly. I need to be able to connect with clients, with team members, and with the partner team to be able to deliver outcomes, to be able to grow a business, to manage a team. But I didn't need to do it alone. I needed to form a partnership. There are many people who don't have my delivery expertise who absolutely have the social skills. They just don't have the opportunity to be able to demonstrate that, because quite often they're being managed by someone more senior, and you have to move past them to be able to get that experience. Here I was, someone who could make a space so that we could grow and succeed together. And so for me, I realized it's all about partnerships. And within less than a year, I was successful in that promotion that I'd missed out for so long. I hadn't yet told work, but the strategies, because I was worried about, are they ready for an autistic management consultant when all that we do is about people? And here I'm saying, I struggle. 3 years ago, on February the 14th, 3 years ago. Yeah, as I said, years keep on changing. I need to keep up with the numbers. And I went and I decided to open up to the head of our department, of the practice in the UK and the head of HR, to talk to them about the 10 years that I'd spent struggling in our organization, the secret that I'd had around struggling with people and how I felt everybody else could be themselves at work unless they were me. And it wasn't just me. I learned of those people who were dyslexic, who were secretly trying to create presentations and work overnight, fearful of spelling mistakes and errors, getting picked up for not being able to turn around presentations quickly enough. And there were so many others. And I put forward the case to establish our employee network, to bring together and to start having a conversation about neurodiversity. Launching it was a big step because I knew I had to be open to champion from the front. And the response was fantastic. Since then, we've had a community of people with regular events and awareness. And neurodiversity is now a conversation that we regularly have within the business. And so for anybody wanting to think about how do they approach this, I don't necessarily say wait for somebody to open up about being neurodiverse, because that is a huge step forward. And I don't think that is the catalyst that we need, but we need to have a conversation. We need to start having events. We need to start creating awareness, because as soon as you do that, as Amanda said, we need to create spaces that people want to open up to share and disclose. 80% of people who are neurodivergent do not want to open up for fear of stereotypes and stigmas. So creating positive environments in which people are supported to succeed helps to overcome that, so that we can help them to think about the way of working before they start struggling, before it gets to 10 years and they are overwhelmed with anxiety or on performance management plans, before they are viewed as not meeting the expectations or standards. And since we established our network with all of the events, we've started having a conversation, not just with each other, but we formed a working group looking at the employee journey, because what we realize is that part of embracing neurodiversity is to understand and look at the employee journey at each one of those different employee touch points. What are those barriers? If we look at recruitment, is the way that we're recruiting people putting us off? Interviews, it is like a social test. And I can tell you that after 20 years and as a management consultant, I will likely fail that social test 9 times out of 10. It doesn't mean that I can't do the job. It just means that within that context, I am not able to put my best foot forward. Is there a way that we can assess people differently for their skills and what they're able to offer that removes a lot of that anxiety? as people are being onboarded, do we give people the opportunity to say, I have an impairment, to talk through what are some of those smaller adjustments, or even, as Amanda said, universal design, offer a menu of options so people don't need to disclose something before they find, so they can pick and choose from a selection of menu options, so they can find a way that works for them. Different formats, being able to have recordings that they can listen to afterwards. People with working memory and processing speeds will not listen and hear things on the fly and retain it. They need time to process information. Can you offer it to them beforehand so they've got time to prepare questions? Can you record it so that they can listen to it after and take their time to process that information? Thinking about the learning and development, not just training about neurodiversity, but also how do we deliver that training? Do we have different ways of offering that? Do we consider some of the softer skills? I spend a lot of time thinking about social interaction and communication, but everything that I learned in my learning and development was that I needed to change. Maybe the way in which we're telling people how to be successful, which focuses on you need to improve your communication skills, you need to change, you need to be more interactive. Maybe we need to start focusing on those outcomes. How do you plan out ways of achieving different outcomes? Thinking about those day-to-day responsibilities. Do we really need to start at 9, end at 5? Can we come in early to avoid traffic? Can we work from home 2 to 3 days a week? As Amanda said, the COVID response, one of the great things about it has been the increased work from home. 7 years of anxiety for me, which was almost daily, and I had daily weekly sessions with my therapist. Within 3 weeks of COVID, I had to put her on furlough because I'd run out of things to say. My anxiety has vanished within 3 weeks. I'm still doing my same job. I'm still having my own meetings. I'm just working at home in an environment, not in an open plan office, not in a crowded room, not dealing with crowded trains, and it is transformed. How do we recognize performance? How do we give that performance feedback? Do we focus on outcomes and then talk to the person about how can they work on their strengths to achieve those outcomes, and what are the types of adjustments we can make to ensure, or partnerships to ensure, that the areas they struggle with are addressed? Because if we do this for everybody, not just the neurodivergent, we can create those employee-centered ways of working that work for everyone without the need to stand up and say, I am autistic. And so I ask, and one of the questions that lots of people talk about is they go, but it's so big, it's so complex, I don't know where to start. So my advice to you is to start small. Think about the little things. Think about during the induction process, during recruitment and onboarding, do you note that you offer discussions around reasonable adjustments? Create a working group from representatives of HR, recruitment, and neurodivergent employees that are already talking, who want to give that, so you can come together and design an employee process and make those little changes. We've been doing this now for a year, and it is beyond my wildest dreams. We have people proactively coming up, not just for neurodiversity, from all types of abilities and considerations. And what we're learning to do is that we need to embrace our differences. We need to embrace our strengths, and we need to support our needs, because it's all about building strong teams together. Because we need those differences, we need that different thinking, because diversity of thought leads to stronger team performance. And we need to level the playing field, identify those barriers, and look at what we can do to tackle and address them or minimize them. And lastly, it's about focusing on the person, not the role. We need to stop trying to change people to fit into a role and start looking at how do we adjust the role to make the most for that person. And if that's one thing that I can leave with you, it's that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Helen. That's a brilliant talk, brilliant presentation. I can see all the comments in the chat. People really finding it insightful and relating to your story and your journey in some way. So that's really great. We have a bit of time for questions. there's a question that came up a few times, and is how do we start creating a safe space for employee to open up about their neurodivergence?
So what we have found, and as I mentioned, in my organization, we have a lot of events. So we have employee internal events hosted for employees. We've had Amanda in as a speaker a number of times, and other people who are neurodivergent to come in. So if you don't have people internally, inviting other people to come in and talk about their life experiences, their journey. I think personal stories, and this is why with Me.Decoded, I think it's the personal stories that help us connect with each other. It takes it out of our brains and into our hearts, and then that opens up the doorway. And what we have found is after each event, we have more and more people wanting to come and talk. If you can find internal champions, I think that is amazing. After I've written into blog posts within the company, I've stood up and shared my story internally. And each time we've had more and more people coming forward to talk about their experiences. We've done workforce composition surveys where we include neurodiversity as one of the options to understand. It is anonymous, but people then see that we're bringing this up in lots of different ways. We talk about it during induction. We offer people that piece. And so a lot of this, we're providing those multiple opportunities to have that discussion. And therefore, it's not about saying to people, do you want to talk about, and they will naturally start to come for the fore. It's a bit like the field of dreams. You build it, they will come, right? If anyone remembers that film reference, but yeah.
Just to add to that, I think in companies where I've seen successful programs as well, is buy-in from the leadership team as well, from the executive team. So it is okay in this work environment to talk about ourselves and who we are. And the point about stories are really powerful. For a parent, I'm doing a lot of networks with parent networks because we're parents of neurodivergent children as well, and just being able to have a safe space to talk about that, but to know that's safe to do so. So awareness is a driver. It really is. ERG groups, neurodiversity champions, places to know where their safe space is. But I think stories are incredibly powerful. We remember stories. They relate to us. They feel personal and pertinent. But buy-in is important. Otherwise it becomes a one-off awareness session, like done neurodiversity tick and on to something else.
And it isn't just a one-off. We have I have a working group every 2 weeks. And quite often when people come in, new joiners to the company, they're told about the working group, they're told about the employee network and how they can get involved. And quite often people, we've had a number of people coming in this year and they were like, felt really empowered to join the company and then to feel part of being, to come in and give their views and their discussions and really want to be part of that conversation. Quite often it's the first time that anybody has spoken to them, right, about this. And so they also, they really appreciate that conversation because suddenly the narrative is changing because they know how we are taking a positive view.
I just wanted as well to really create, give a takeaway for people attending in that, what is the first step that we can take as employers to start making change, to start making a difference in our organizations?
I think, so a lot of people, and what I've seen is people start targeted recruitment, right? And I would say that that is great. And the targeted, we can see a lot of autism hiring programs, that is great. But what I really believe is that you need to start focusing on the culture within the organization. We cannot bring people into an organization if they are not able to succeed once they're in. And so, I think thinking about your culture, thinking about how you can help, because there will be a lot, and Amanda's mentioned this a couple of times, there will be people in the organization already that you just don't know about, right? And it's then starting to say, okay, let's look at our employee life cycle. Let's think about the areas that we want to develop, start that working group, invite people in to say, right, we would like to make a change. We'd like you to be part of this change with us, and invite people to start to become part of that group and let them help you set out those priorities and think about those changes. And also, doing an assessment. I know that Amanda and many organizations help companies carry out audits around best practice and providing training courses to raise that awareness. I think those are some of the things just to kickstart that conversation, I think is really important.
Thank you so much. Amanda, do you have a final word for our audience?
That you can't not consider neurodiversity. I think that's one of my bottom line, because it is, if you want to optimize productivity and you want to have an inclusive workplace and you want to attract talent, I think, the point is you never know who doesn't apply for a job. You only know the people who do. And maybe we have opened the doors because of our recruitment processes, because of our interview and onboarding, to a particular shape person that's fitted the way that we've operated. So I do think that neurodiversity is important for good inclusive processes, and it's about belonging. And I go absolutely with Helen, which is about your values and culture as an organization will mean that it benefits everybody. It's not just, and we move away from those people and us to actually it's all of us is really important. So that would be my bottom line, I think, probably.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you. I think we can wrap up here, but it's such an amazing session. We've all learned so much, and I just wanted to finish with a word for our audience. Like, we really want everyone to start thinking about how they can make change and to make a difference in their organizations. So we are inviting you to make a pledge to supporting neurodiversity in your workplace, and to share it with your network and start having those conversations around you, personal relationships at work, and start to change behaviors. Thank you so much to everyone who attended today, and we'll see you all soon.